Freshwater predators possess a highly specialized cranial nerve that responds violently to chemical heat, forcing an involuntary, aggressive attack even when the fish has completely shut down its feeding behavior. Last week, on a heavily pressured reservoir in East Texas, I bypassed the traditional olfactory system of the largemouth bass entirely. I dusted a standard soft plastic worm with 2 cents of a common black spice straight from my kitchen pantry. In the exact 4-hour window that followed, that microscopic chemical irritant triggered 14 violent, rod-jarring strikes from bass that had previously ignored every premium, scientifically formulated scent in my boat. We are not talking about enticing a hungry fish to eat. We are talking about weaponizing a fish's neurological defense mechanisms to forcefully ignite a reaction strike. It was a brutally hot Tuesday in late June on Sam Rayburn Reservoir. The surface water temperature was pushing a stagnant 84 degrees, the sun was blinding, and the barometric pressure was climbing. During these specific, punishing conditions, largemouth bass enter a state of severe metabolic lethargy. They do not cruise the flats. They do not actively hunt. They retreat deep into the shadows of submerged timber and suspend motionless in the water column to conserve every possible ounce of caloric energy. To catch a bass in this state using traditional methods is an exercise in pure frustration, because traditional methods rely entirely on convincing the fish that it is hungry. To establish a proper, undeniable scientific baseline for this test, I started my morning using the industry standard approach. I rigged a dark-colored 10-inch plastic worm on a 4-0 offset hook with a 3 8-ounce tungsten weight. I then coated the plastic heavily in a premium commercial attractant. This specific gel costs $16 for a small bottle. It is heavily marketed by professional anglers as the ultimate crawfish and garlic amino acid blend, meticulously engineered in a lab to trigger a feeding response. I pitched that expensive, heavily scented plastic directly into the heart of a massive submerged oak tree sitting in 15 feet of water. I spent an entire hour meticulously picking apart that single piece of timber. I let the bait soak on the bottom. I hopped it slowly through the branches. I gave the commercial amino acids every possible opportunity to disperse and work. In 60 solid minutes of intense focus, I received exactly 1 bite. A lethargic, half-hearted tap from a fish that picked up the tail of the worm and immediately dropped it before I could even set the hook. The failure here wasn't the lure, and it wasn't my presentation. The failure was the fundamental biological assumption that the entire tackle industry relies on. They assume that to catch a fish, you must appeal to its appetite. But a bass suspended in 84-degree water is not going to expend the energy to eat, just because a piece of plastic smells vaguely like garlic. I reeled up, stripped the $16 commercial gel completely off my plastic, and pulled a small, generic plastic container out of my bag. Inside was ordinary, finely ground black pepper, the exact same black spice sitting in your kitchen cabinet right now. A massive container of this costs perhaps $3 at any local grocery store. The amount I was about to use for this entire day of fishing cost approximately 2 cents. Here is the precise deployment method, because application is critical. I didn't just sprinkle the dry powder onto the plastic, as the surface tension of the lake would wash it off the second it hit the water. Instead, I took a single drop of neutral vegetable oil, just enough to create a microscopic, water-resistant adhesive layer on the plastic worm. I rubbed the oil in, and then I aggressively rolled the bait in the black pepper. The fine black dust adhered to every ridge, rib, and contour of the plastic. It looked strange, gritty, and completely unnatural. But this method has absolutely nothing to do with visual deception. I pitched the pepper-coated worm right back into the left side of the exact same submerged oak tree I had just spent an hour failing to fish. The bait sank into the darkness. At exactly 14 seconds after the bait hit the bottom, the rod didn't just tap. It was nearly ripped from my hands. The strike was incredibly violent. I set the hook and immediately felt the heavy, thrashing weight of a furious largemouth bass. I fought the fish through the timber and pulled a thick, 3.5-pound bass over the rail of the boat. I looked inside its mouth. The fish hadn't just mouthed the bait to inspect it, it had inhaled the entire 10-inch worm with absolute, unadulterated aggression. I checked the bait, recoated the worm with another 2 cents of black pepper, and pitched it back to the right side of the exact same tree. 4 minutes later, the line jumped sideways with a vicious snap. I set the hook again. Another bass, pushing 4 pounds, fought with the frantic, explosive energy of a reaction strike. Over the next 3 hours, moving from timber pile to timber pile, the pattern became undeniable. I was no longer hoping for bites. I was systematically triggering them. By the time the session ended, I had pulled 14 largemouth bass out of a stretch of water that had previously seemed completely devoid of active life. 14 violent, rod-jarring strikes using a 2-cent kitchen spice, compared to 0 landed fish using a $6 commercial amino acid attractant. To understand why a simple black spice systematically dismantles a tackle box full of expensive laboratory chemicals, you have to look past the glossy marketing of the fishing industry and dive directly into the cold, hard neurobiology of predatory fish. Commercial scents, the garlic sprays, the shad oils, the sweet amino blends, are all designed to target a fish's olfactory system. They are formulated to simulate the smell of prey. But when a bass is lethargic and not actively feeding, its brain simply suppresses those food signals. It is biologically identical to a human ignoring the smell of a restaurant after they have just finished eating a massive meal. The scent is there, but the desire to consume is turned off. Black pepper operates on an entirely different, incredibly powerful neurological pathway. Black pepper, derived from the Piper nigrum vine, contains a highly active chemical alkaloid called piperine. When that pepper-coated lure enters the water, the piperine begins to slowly leach off the plastic, creating a concentrated, invisible chemical cloud in the immediate vicinity of the bait. When a bass breathes in that water or detects it through its sensory pores, it does not process the piperine as a flavor. It does not process it as a food source. Piperine aggressively attacks the fish's trigeminal nerve. The trigeminal nerve is the 5th cranial nerve in vertebrates. It is a massive, complex sensory pathway responsible for detecting environmental irritants, noxious chemicals, and temperature anomalies in the water. It is the exact same nerve pathway that makes a human being's eyes water, nose run, and mouth burn when eating a hot chili pepper. When the piperine cloud reaches the bass's sensory receptors, it instantly triggers the nociceptors, the specific sensory neurons that respond to damaging or irritating stimuli. The bass suddenly perceives a localized zone of intense chemical heat and irritation right in front of its face. The fish's central nervous system receives a glaring, unavoidable warning signal that an irritating, disruptive chemical anomaly has invaded its immediate personal space. Because a bass does not have hands to swat an irritant away, and because it is highly territorial of its immediate suspension zone in the timber, it relies on its only available defense mechanism: its mouth. The bass strikes the lure not because it wants to eat it, but to kill it, crush it, or violently remove the irritating source from its environment. This is the biological definition of a true reaction strike. It is a mandatory, involuntary neurological response. The fish simply cannot help itself. The piperine essentially hacks the fish's nervous system, bypassing the digestive system entirely and forcing the fish to attack out of sheer neurological irritation. This biological reality completely exposes a massive, glaring blind spot in the $380 million fishing scent industry. If you walk into any major outdoor retailer, you will see entire aisles dedicated to attractants. The tackle industry spends millions of dollars in research and development trying to create the perfect illusion of food. They sell you sweet oils, crawfish pheromones, and complex amino pastes, all designed to convince a fish that it is hungry. But they have entirely, deliberately ignored the trigeminal nerve. They have completely ignored the pathway of chemical irritation. Why? Because you cannot patent black pepper. You cannot bottle a common pantry spice that costs $3 a pound, slap a professional tournament angler's face on the label, put it in a neon package, and convince the public to pay $20 for it. The profit margin simply does not exist. So the industry pretends this biological trigger isn't real. They keep selling you the illusion of food, hoping you never figure out that a 2-cent pinch of piperine can override a fish's nervous system and force a violent strike on a sweltering summer day when the fish have completely locked their jaws. This is not an old wives' tale, and this is not fishing folklore. This is documented, undeniable chemosensory biology. The trigeminal nerve is real. The piperine trigger is absolute. And the 14 base I pulled out of the deep timber of Sam Rayburn Reservoir are mathematically irrefutable. The next time you are on the water, the sun is beating down, the water is hot, and your expensive electronics are showing fish that simply refuse to bite. Do not reach for another expensive bottle of garlic spray. Reach for the black pepper. Coat your bait, pitch it directly into the structure, and wait for the chemical heat to do exactly what millions of years of evolution programmed it to do. If you are interested in the raw physics of water and the actual sensory biology of fish, consider subscribing to the channel. Have you ever noticed fish reacting aggressively to unusual or unconventional baits? Have you ever triggered a violent reaction strike when you knew the fish weren't actively feeding? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one of them.